Hi, my name is Juana Gallegos, and I will be presenting my newsletters for information processing and multiple intelligence theory. For my first newsletter, I will be talking about information processing, and my title is Virtual Curriculum Puts Strain on Learning Processing. And the reason why I made up this title is because I use the information that I learned from information processing, and I applied it to a real life situation that I'm facing at this moment. During a virtual meeting with a teacher I work with as an instructional assistant, I have seen how many of the students have been struggling since they have returned to face-to-face lessons at my school. And the teacher expressed her concern about how many of the students have been regressing and how many have almost forgotten their previous information, and how they continue to have difficulty in continuing to process information in order for them to remember. So within information processing is based on the metaphor, as you will, of a computer mind, as in we individuals process our information similar to as a computer would process their information. Under here we have learning processing stages, where number one, it deals with input processing. That's the first step. Input processes that concerns with analysis. So when we see something, we put it in our minds and we start storing that information, much like a computer. After that, when we store that information, that's where we gather what we know about that information, and we start processing that information. And with that information, knowing what it is, we output that process, and that's how it makes us use appropriate responses to that particular situation or task. So this is basically my intro here, explaining how I got to this idea of comparing what I have seen personally and how information processing has been affected at the current times with virtual learning. And I further explain here with what is information processing. And information processing is a theory that views and how we process information through our senses and how our brain processes information to later retrieve it. So it's important to understand that each student understands and learns differently and is influenced by their student's environment and biology. Therefore, students that have almost been learning virtually for a year have been affected with their environment and how they're processing the information, because I feel that they've been very limited to only on-screen interactions. Teachers must adapt and change to the way they engage students and provide resources. Within information processing, a teacher must remember that within information processing theory, individuals have short-term memory and has a limited space capacity for a limited amount of time. And that is something that as of now, I've seen that many teachers have been basing their lessons with curriculum, and it affects the students' information processing because their workload is overloaded. And students, as well as individuals in general, we tend to have a short amount of capacity to process that information. So it's very important to take that and acknowledge when you are creating lesson plans. And in order to make sure that the student is retaining the information, as I said, teachers need to repeat and engage student participation with either via chat virtually or and make groups amongst classmates, create collaboration, and ask frequent questions. So if teachers, as long as we continue at the moment to do virtual learning, this is a great strategy to continue to engage students in order to make sure that their information is being retained and that they are being an active participant in the classroom. Within learning processing, a teacher must also be aware of conceptual attention, and that's how students process information by limiting the amount of information. So because, as I mentioned before, it is really important that although students are not physically in this class, that they are not overworked. And I feel that right now students are being more overworked virtually, and that's why students are not grasping that information, and they're just passive students at the moment, and it's really sad to see. And also, as I mentioned, it is important that educators realize that the students' conceptual attention can process information by limiting the amount of information and in order to receive information and remember it. I mentioned this article, the newsletter that I was reading, and it's called Managing Attention and Distractibility in Online Learning. And during these times in virtual learning, teachers face challenges in engaging students and creating lessons that grab students' attention. And in this letter, not only does it give various examples of strategies to do in a virtual classroom, but it also gives hope to teachers that they can also create an effective learning process information within environment within virtual learning. So I recommend you reading this article. Furthermore, I will be talking about multiple intelligence theory, which I think is one of my favorite theories to learn about. An effective teacher basically understands and is aware that each student has different kinds of thinking and different strengths and different intelligence. So Howard Gardner is the brilliant man that came up with this theory and of multiple intelligence, and supports the idea that children have different kind of intellectual strengths, and those strengths are important in how children learn. Within Gardner's multiple intelligence theory, he named 8, which are linguistic, logical, mathematical, visual, spatial, musical, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. Within this theory, Gardner further suggests that within this theory, students must have an active role in the learning processes, and teachers can support the learning with providing resources and material in a way that interests the students in their own way. The most effective teachers will know that each student needs different resources in order to have an equity environment in the classroom. So similar to information processing in that students must have an active participation in the classroom, so does multiple intelligence. And more importantly, with this theory, teachers provide the resources in order to help their students' needs to expand further into what are their strengths and intelligences. I compared again with the current concept what's happening with virtual learning, and with virtual learning, teachers will find it difficult to engage students and provide the resources needed online and virtually, and any lesson or environment, a teacher must always ask themselves how they are reaching each child. Within this multiple intelligence theory, Gardner further explains that everything can be taught more than one way, and anything that is understood can be shown in more than one way. And I repeated this quote that he said because I think is one of an important aspects of this theory. And not only is it a way of helping teachers during these times of virtual learning, but I think that it gives us more perspective that we can have all the other strategies and other approaches to each child's needs, and that we don't have to limit ourselves within that whole space and environment. As long as teachers are willing to try their best without any fear of trial and error. And I think that's something that I grasp from this multiple intelligence theory. Also, teachers can create strategies with virtual class, as I mentioned, with trial and error. And more than ever, I think teachers should begin helping their students foster their students' education by thinking more beyond and thinking within like a scientifically towards their whole perspective, as in by thinking scientifically. I mentioned here that students are able to, as long as the student is able to understand what is a hypothesis, how they can further elaborate what the hypothesis is and see the results, and then work on to finding what works or not. I think, as Howard Gardner mentioned, is a great base to start with education, and then other subjects such as biology or math can be further along or prolongated and be easily explained when a student has a scientifically concept of how to think things. Furthermore, naturally, students will have a better chance in making decisions and problem solving within that mentality of scientifically thinking. The best way to impact a student virtually and throughout this theory is by minimizing workload, as mentioned before, and providing feedback for all students to internalize. So providing feedback to let the student know how are they doing and how they can improve. Sometimes, as Howard Gardner mentioned, is that teachers give out tests and the students don't even know if they did well, or if they did well, why they did well. So the better the student knows the reasons or what they need to work on, the better they can become more aware of their intelligence and strengths and weaknesses. And furthermore, teachers must also highlight the students' performances and effort for which the student are accountable for. So that also bases on the idea that students are active participants in their education, and that whatever they do, that is because that will result into their perception and their work, and also that's how they will learn what are their intelligence and their strengths. And to furthermore end this my newsletter, I mentioned this other newsletter called How to Use Gardner's Multiple Intelligences Theory to Help Struggling Students. And I found it on this website here, and it talks about 5 multiple intelligence activities and strategies, and I think they're really interesting to see, to give you other perspectives of not only understanding the theory, but also actively using it in a classroom and also in virtual classrooms as well. And one was